So good afternoon, everyone. This is Shadiati. I'm presenting you today's the webinar as a moderator, and the title of today's webinar is Healthy Schools During and After COVID-19. This webinar is part of the HERES project, and HERES project stands for Healthy and Resilient Schools. It's a project between the government of Chile and Belgium, and mainly involving Dr. Beatrice Pederit, Dr. Valeria Cartes, Geoffrey van Mozeika, and Shadi Atia. And simply, the intention of this project is to share experiences regarding the design of new schools, retrofitting of existing one, and operation of those, in order to identify best practices and guidelines for both policymakers and school managers. Well, the overall objective of this webinar is to help in answering the following questions in the context of the pandemic. What measures are taken in various countries to guarantee the safety and health of children? What spatial weaknesses in school design are highlighted by this crisis? And how can school urbanism or spaces sharing make this design more resilient? We have to take into account that most of the presenters are on the side of spatial organization. We do not have medical doctors, so this is not a technical presentation on the medical concerns, but it's more a presentation on how to manage the space in the context of COVID-19. Well, today's webinar will have four presenters. Speaker one, Elisabeth Aller from the Danish Ministry of Education, with a presentation entitled Healthy Schools During and After COVID-19 in Denmark. Then we'll have a presentation from Jens Aerts, as an urban planner at Buur and consultant UNICEF. His presentation title is Schools as Healthy Environments for the Future Generation. And speaker three, Deborah Tillemans from Belgium, representing Wallonie Bruxelles Education. Her title of presentation is called Are School Buildings Resilient? Before finally having Juan Torres from Canada presenting his presentation under the title Between School and Home, Children's Mobility in a Context of Social Distancing. After the presentation of each of those presenters, who will have 15 minutes to present, we might allow for pressing questions. So I would like to ask you to actively engage in the chat box by asking questions after each presentation. We will pick up one or two, or maybe maximum three. And then after that, we will have a final Q&A session for 15 minutes where you can engage as a speaker with the presentations. Well, let's start with the first speaker, Elisabeth Aller. I would like to introduce her through her bio. Elisabeth Aller is the leader of the Secretariat for the Private School Sector in the Ministry of Children Education in Denmark, as well as being responsible for the handling of international policy-related assignments in the department. She has 20-year experience in the field of primary and lower secondary education, and 10 years in school leadership and 7 in government, where she has represented Denmark in the famous PISA governing board and the TALIS board of participating countries, and on the international advisory boards. From 2002 and 2000 to 2006, she worked in Mozambique for 4 years as an education and communication advisor for the famous Danish NGO IBIS, and Elisabeth holds a bachelor in education and master in rhetoric and communication. With that said, I will share now the slides of Elisabeth Aller to allow her to speak. The floor is yours. Don't hesitate to ask me to shuffle the presentation. You can just tell me next when you start. Elisabeth, can you hear me?
Yes, I can, and thank you very much for that introduction. It sounds impressive. It doesn't quite sound like oneself when heard this way, but thank you very much for the invitation to take part in your webinar today. I'm looking forward to hearing the presentations and actually also to hear the questions. So I was probably a bit premature when I made my slides in July. As you can see, I've named my slides during and after COVID-19. And we do see now in Denmark that there isn't an after, at least not in August. Just before we move on to the other slides, I'd like to just give you a very, very brief overview of the Danish education system, school system. So in Denmark, we have a school for what we call grade 0, so preschool, up to grade 10. And they're all taught in the same building, so they don't change after primary to lower secondary school. And that's important because it means that we have young and older students in the same buildings, which did have a role to play in the shutting down and reopening of schools. We have 1,600 approximately of those schools, primary, lower secondary schools, and in those schools 9,000 to 10,000 teachers and somewhere around 700 students. Thank you. So let's move on.
Okay.
First of all, a brief overall timeline on the last, well, very close to last, 5 months in Danish education. As you can see, we were pretty early locking down Denmark on March the 16th. And 3 weeks after that, the Prime Minister announced reopening phase 1. And 1 week after that, we were ready with the published guidelines for that phase, for the reopening of the schools. And only a few days after that, the schools were allowed to open. And I'll get back to what was in that allowed. Then 3 weeks later, the Prime Minister announced the reopening of the schools phase 2. And 1 week later, we had a new set of guidelines. And 5 days later, again, schools were allowed to reopen according to the new guidelines. And then we had a phase 3 just before the Danish summer holidays, which didn't really have a lot of changes. I'll get back to that for the schools. And now we're in phase 4. Thank you. So let's move on. And I'd like to briefly introduce you to the overall approach to reopening of the schools here. As you can see, some of the vital pillars here were knowledge. What do we know about the spread of the disease? And dialogue. And acknowledging that this is a decision made based on advice and knowledge from the health authorities, but it is a political decision how we've approached the reopening. And who's been involved in this dialogue? And we do believe that the dialogue has been a key to what we consider, well, success is a hard term here, but a fairly good reopening strategy. We've had a lot of partnerships with the ministry, at some levels, the minister, at others, us, civil servants, and all the key stakeholders, the municipalities, they're the school owners here, the private school organizations, the students' organizations, the parents' organizations, and the unions. And it's worth probably mentioning here that 98% of Danish teachers in primary, lower secondary schools are organized in either the public school union for teachers or the private school teacher union. And that's probably quite crucial to our dialogue, because that means that when we have a cooperation with the union, their voice is very, very strong, and they represent more or less all teachers. And that builds trust in the decisions made. We've had meetings with hours of notice. Whenever something has happened, an announcement of a reopening of new phase, everyone's been called in for meetings at ministerial level, even the minister and the chairpersons. And the purpose has always been to ensure the best possible solution for everyone included, for the children, for the teachers, all staff. So an open and a very, very frequent dialogue. Thank you. Please, next. So just a brief on the different phases. The lockdown, as you saw before, March 16th, everything was closed down, except in schools, emergency teaching for special groups. So vulnerable students, students with severe special needs, students who, for some reason, were so vulnerable that we knew that staying at home 24/7 would be a very, very bad solution for them. They were allowed to come to school and receive emergency teaching and care. students whose parents work in essential jobs and services and who couldn't stay at home and shouldn't stay at home, they were allowed to come to school. All other students from then on were taught online. So next, please. And of course, legislation had to be in order for the schools to be allowed to not live up to what the Danish law on public school teaching actually dictates. So the reopening of phase 1. Not all students were allowed to come back. Students up to approximately 12 years were allowed back. The older ones, as I said, they attend the same physical school, but they were not allowed to come back. And why? Why only the youngest students? Well, because as you can see in some of this here, physical space was a key element to the reopening. You couldn't have all the children in the same buildings. I mean, it was a practical issue. So the older ones were kept at home, where we knew that the younger students benefit way less from virtual teaching than the older students, plus that a lot of the parents struggled maintaining their work levels from home when they also had to support younger children learning virtually. So students were allowed to come back, the younger ones. And actually, they did come back. 90% of the students and the children came back, but not all on the same day, because, as I said, schools were allowed from certain days to open, but not until they were absolutely sure that they could meet all the requirements and follow the guidelines. Then rather keep the students at home until it was safe for the students to come back. Thank you. So let's move on. Here are just a few examples that I'm not going to read it to you because I'm absolutely sure you all read well, but a few examples of the guidelines we, together with the health authorities, produced. And maybe it's important that I stress that these partnerships that we've had always also included the health authorities. So meetings between the ministry, all the key stakeholders, and the health authorities. As you can see, many probably recognizable guidelines. One thing that that might stick out was the requirement the students were kept in smaller groups, a handful of students together, but not only at school, also in their free time. So you could not, as a child, choose who to play with after school. That had to be limited to a very, very small group in order to prevent spread, obviously. Maybe also mentioning that schools are very, very different. Students are different, schools are different. So, I mean, yes, we wanted students to be taught in smaller groups in the classrooms, but not all schools could accommodate that. So some students were taught in museums or conference halls, in the gyms, in the labs. So we had to be flexible. Everyone had to be flexible. Break times, different times. Children were handed over to the schools in the parking lot or in designated areas in different times. So not everyone would get there at 8. Arrows on the floors in order to indicate the walking direction, etc. Sinks, because hand washing obviously is a key element. And we all know the school facilities when it comes to hand wash. So a lot of sinks were put up, and a lot of cleaning has been required. And all these things cost money. So the government decided very early on to reimburse all expenses in connection with, extra cleaners, sinks, toilet facilities, whatever. Yes, so let us move on. Thank you. So that was the first phase. Now, before we move on to the next phase, what did we do to support apart from the financial support? I think one of the things that we've experienced really worked was a hotline, a phone hotline but obviously it wasn't open 24 hours a day. So there was an email hotline. So worried parents, worried schools during evenings, whatever, were allowed to get in touch and ask their questions and get answers. And a very close connection between the hotline and a Q&A on our website. So anytime we would hear, important questions asked on the hotline or from the sector in our partnership meetings, immediately Q&As were made so that was accessible knowledge for everyone. And a lot of educational and guiding material on virtual teaching produced, and our learning consultants from the ministry were available to support teachers who needed more knowledge on how to actually manage a new tool in their teaching. Thank you. Let's move on. Time flies. So reopening of phase 2, what was changed? The last students were allowed back in the school. And I mean, you've probably all met 15-year-olds who did not think school was the greatest thing on earth. They were all thrilled to be allowed back, and they all acknowledged the importance of being in the same physical space and the importance of being close to your teacher, in order to maintain the relationship that is actually an important factor in learning and thriving. Guidelines were softened, and there was more local freedom given with the phase 2 guidelines, as well as the social distance requirements were changed so that children could now sit with 1 meter between them and 2 meters between the teacher and the front row, which is a bit peculiar to some, but that is because there's face-to-face contact when children sit next to each other. Usually they're not at least supposed to turn their faces towards each other all the time. Most of all, as before, hygiene. And again, teaching outside, trying to make interaction between students as little as possible. Group sizes up to normal class sizes. So moving forward. Thank you. I think that's the most important. Then came reopening phase 3, which I mentioned earlier, wasn't enormously changing for the schools, but school leaving exam, so the national exam after grade 9, was cancelled. And instead of that, because it's a requirement in order to move on to vet or to high school level, instead a teacher's assessment was put in place, and that was to be made by the teachers one of the last days and given the last day of the school year in order to maintain the motivation of the students. Because obviously, if you got the grades, why continue schooling? Now, yes, and then of course graduation ceremonies, which are really important to both parents and students. So rules and regulations around those, again, in order to maintain safety and health. What we've done since reopening in August is several things. An evaluation, or actually a gathering of experiences during the COVID-19 months, has been put in place so that the Danish Evaluations Institute is going to do a qualitative and quantitative gathering of experiences. So asking students, parents, teachers, school leaders, how have they experienced these different phases and the different tools that we've had to use? And we hope to have a fine report on that in January. And again, based on that, we may see which direction we are moving forward in next year. And overall, what are our experiences? Right now, we see schools that are not exactly back to normal, but we still see schools close to the way they were, and students and parents and teachers reporting that things are actually going well. And we have some we find interesting and surprising experiences. Many schools find that the division of breaks between classes or maybe years at different times that has changed the classes, because students come back into the classrooms in a completely different mode than when they've all 800 been outside at the same time. And teachers have been with classes they knew, so children have actually been supervised during their breaks by teachers they know better. And even the handing over of students outside the classrooms has been a very positive effect or experience in many schools, that parents aren't standing in the classroom waiting, giving instructions to their children before leaving, so that the school day is becoming better. Finally, and this goes back to where I started, the after COVID experiences, we do now, unfortunately, in Denmark, see some local outbreaks. And in order to handle them, we've had to look into what's the best way of dealing with a local outbreak. Local dancing with COVID, as the ministry says. So when there is one student in a school testing positive for COVID-19, first the social circle around that student is investigated. So who's been close to this student, and based on that, it's decided whether a small group of children, the entire class, and maybe the teacher, the year, several years, if there's been interaction between classes, or the entire school is shut down. So no size fits all here. It's taken, the decisions are made on exactly that situation, and hopefully will manage to contain the spread that way. And no masks so far. We do see that distance still helps enough. So this actually concludes my presentation, and I do hope I managed, speaking fast, to stay on my 15 minutes.
Yeah, you did very well. Thank you very much. And we can have some questions, so you can close if you have any closing remarks.
Well, thank you very much. I mean, this is 5 very, very hard months for schools, for children, for parents, for teachers, and for health authorities and civil servants, summed up in a cube of 15 minutes. But I hope you got a small impression of our approach. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Aller. We are happy that you accepted the invitation. And I would like to invite the audience for any pressing questions. Don't hesitate on the chat box to ask specific questions to Mrs. Elisabeth Aller. I will read them out and we will ask her. My personal remarks on your presentation, it's very interesting that you have a model of governance that engages the different actors in a very strict way. And what I find very interesting, the flexibility and the confidence of changing the measures. And you mentioned that the communication was key. And I think since you do a very interesting approach of governance and collective decision making, which is almost participatory, you had an advantage to go through the crisis in a confident way. Very interesting. And I find it very interesting to read the documentation report about the learned lessons that you are talking about.
Going to maybe add to the communication side that actually letters were sent out to the parents in connection with the first phase of reopening. And posters were made, small animated films were made for the students to see before coming back, so that they wouldn't be scared. They would feel comfortable in the new ways of dealing with COVID at school. So a huge campaign made, aimed at the different target groups obviously, but that I think was a very, very important tool as well.
Yeah, thank you very much. I find it also very interesting, this question of changing the legislation. Normally it's difficult, but again, I think the governance, it seems that your model is engaging. If you have most of stakeholders, it will be more easier to have a consensus, even though it's complicated because you must have the parliament. I don't know how is the parliament engaged. But I have another question more specific to take us in another area. I need to know more about the testing. Can you tell me if there is a specific approach or protocol or rules for testing students? I'm not talking on the testing that happens in hospitals. I'm talking that did you have a system that you will have on-site testing, or that you force students to do kind of testing? That's the first question. And the second question, when you answer it, will be about sport facilities.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Well, I'll answer then briefly to three things, because you talk about parliament. We have a one-party government right now, but just like the ministry had the sector partnerships, and we had those different levels. The ministry had also all the political spokespersons in the education area. She gathered in a small board, sort of, that would meet just as regularly that she would meet the sector, in order for them to be part of the political decision making. So it was the parliament, not the ministry, not the government itself. This was a unified parliament behind these decisions, which, as you state, made new legislation and ministerial orders way easier. Now to the testing. Nope. No testing facilities in schools, and no testing orders, except, I mean, if you came back from traveling in a red zone, at some point you would need to have a test and prove that you were negative. Today, in this phase 4, when we identify a circle and students are sent back because there is a contaminated child or student or teacher, yes, then students must be tested. But that's all organized through the health authorities. Okay. And then you ask about PE facilities. And actually, that has been something we spend a lot of time on, because do you disinfect the ball between I throw it and you yes. catch it? That doesn't work. So usually tools must be disinfected, but then a lot of hand washing must take place in the facilities. And maybe this isn't where you do a lot of handball, but more football. And you try to keep as much distance as possible.
Anything on swimming?
Anything on swimming? Actually, that is a very good question that I'm not able to answer. I don't remember having been asked that. But yeah. But during the first phases, no swimming. All swimming pools were closed.
Yeah. Okay, so I think so far we have rounded fast the presentation and had covered some aspects. It's very appreciated to have your experience and local experience about Denmark. Okay, thank you very much, Mrs. Aller, and I will proceed with the following presenter.
Thank you.
Well, I will introduce Mr. Aerts very fast. Mr. Aerts is an urban planner with 20 years experience working in the international development agencies, city governments, developers, and non-profit organization on the intersection of practice, policy, and research. Most recently, he authored the UNICEF's handbook on shaping urbanization for children and supported the agency in the implementation of urban program and child-friendly cities initiatives. He contributed to other publications for sure and initiatives like urban health, road safety, and so on. But an interesting one is called Street for Kids program of the Global Designing Cities Initiative and Placemaking X. He holds a master degree in civil engineering and architecture from the University of Leuven, KU Leuven most probably, and obtained his master of urban planning from the Universitat Politècnica de Catalunya in Barcelona. With that said, I would leave the floor to Mr. Ars. Would you like me, Mr. Ars, to share the slides, or I give you the sharing facility?
I will present them.
Okay, I will stop sharing and the floor is yours. Thank you very much for accepting.
Thank you. Okay, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for the organizers for inviting me. I've spent the last 5 years in New York working with UNICEF. I just moved back to Belgium, so this is also for me kind of coming home, but still be connected internationally through webinars. That's a very nice experience. I wanted to present to you today very briefly what I've been developing throughout UNICEF on working more on the built environment. That is very important to influence actually health and safety for children. And of course, schools are important, but I wanted to maybe also, and also of course, COVID-19 has put a lot of pressure on children. But I want to also take a step back, and I think that's the objective of the webinar, to also think about resilience on the longer term and building back better, how cities and schools could be more healthy and how also children could be supported to adopt healthy behaviors. I wanted to briefly just mention, of course, that UNICEF and many other UN agencies have been writing a lot of guidance lately, and really have been working day and night to, in the first place, try to give good guidance to governments in how to actually deal with the emergent crisis. So they've written guidance about how to prevent COVID-19 in the schools and how to control them in the schools. But then, of course, they've also gone into guidance about when or how should schools reopen. Now, UNICEF particularly, it's an agency that works globally. They would not really be so present in Europe and United States because governments here, they get direct advice, and they have also a lot of own capacities to have direct advice from WHO and have their government structures that work on this. But for a lot of other countries, it's really important to have good guidance. And so, for example, the framework for reopening schools, there's a lot of elements that are very recognizable for people who work in a government environment about reopening schools, where it's about really taking into account for things to how can you safely operate, how can you have proper learning, how do you, very important, include the most marginalized, and also how do you ensure well-being and protection, where you have also considerations about what do you have to think about prior to reopening, what do you have to think about during the process of reopening, and what do you have to do, think about with the schools after reopening. But I don't want to go into this, and I think it's also perfectly illustrated by the first speaker. I wanted to rather also take a step back and to see how important schools are actually beyond education and also beyond just their space and educational system. Because if I just wanted to recall everyone, the schools have been closed. That means in a lot of cases there was no education. There was no guaranteed access to learning online. So for a lot of people, it was not even possible, even if the schools opened virtually. But also a lot of countries have struggled, seeing that school lunches and access to affordable and healthy food is so important through the schools. I witnessed myself in the United States, but also the FAO has done a very interesting survey to countries, and it came up as one major issue around food, that because the schools were closed, that the most vulnerable children don't have access to school lunch. Of course, they have less access to play, physical activity, because often schools are the places where they have a bit of space in urban context. There has been an increased sedentary lifestyle. There has been no social context. There's more anxiety and stress because we are continuously discussing about also the virus. And unfortunately, there's also been more exposure to violence and abuse at home. So just saying that schools are much more than education, places for education. And I wanted to connect that with an area what I've been working on, mostly as a built environment specialist, is to also accompany UNICEF into developing advocacy and technical guidance into saying that as we are moving into an urbanized world, which for Europe is very obvious, but for globally it's still something that is in a learning trajectory, that cities, that we really have to think about how the cities are designed, not just from a supply chain perspective, which could be the obvious link to built environments, especially because we design, we provide space, we provide infrastructure, but also think about how the urban planning design defines actually the healthy environment that supports healthy behavior. So that's also about making infrastructure where healthy behaviors can be adopted. And why am I saying this? Because if you look at the longer term to the Build Back Better idea, that you see there's a big connection between that COVID-19 is also shaped in an environment that is getting more and more unhealthy. The fact that it exists, viruses will not go away. It will increase, and also it seems like a lot of people are more vulnerable to it because they have an unhealthy status. And positively also, it's good to remind ourselves that schools are also places where children play and they foster relationships, and it's so important for their brain development. It's not just about studying, it's really about that relational dynamic that appears, especially in the younger years. Schools are also places where we hopefully, and we really have to bet on that because we as adults have actually failed, is to really work with children towards more sustainable habits. For example, if we see how much previously people were using I'm talking about developing world, of course, because that has been my scope, that previously developing countries, people used much more non-motorized transport. You see that once they get into a development dynamic that reduces, and so children are very important to be able to support them, to accommodate all the infrastructure for them, and also have it inserted into the education cycles that they can have healthier behaviors and be convince themselves and comforted themselves to learn to bike and to be comforted to walk and bike to school. The same about waste. Waste is a very big issue that is challenging our planet, and children are very keen to think about that. So it's also, again, something that is very important to bring into the thinking about schools. And why I'm saying that is that when I travel for work and I try to work with governments on child-friendly cities, then it's sometimes very difficult to think about the places where you are, that you think we have designed this as adults, and there's actually nothing child-friendly about it. And so it made us think that we really have to focus on child-friendliness. That's not only about health and social protection and education, but it's really also about designing cities. So the book that was mentioned before, we published it 2 years ago, was really a call towards city makers to put children first, and to train city planners and also train cities to actually adopt some principles that we have developed, and where we also have not only trained, but we have trained architects and urban planners in different countries to really also be comfortable to work with children directly, so that the children are very important into the design and building process. Now, I wanted to quickly say, focus on 3 areas that I think are very relevant for the educational and the school environment, where I think it's very important as also as designers to think about, which is, first of all, if you look at the public amenities of schools, there's still a big opportunity actually to grasp to make the open areas of schools much more accessible for outside of the school hours. So a lot of cities have started to redesign them as squares actually, but also in COVID-19 there hasn't been an immediate arrangement possible to make sure that these spaces were still available, because when we asked everybody to physically distance but also still treat our lives in a healthy way, it was in a lot of city contexts very difficult actually to have the space, and so schoolyards are very important to use in that case, and also to invest into the courtyards to be much more attractive, to really trigger different kinds of play. Movement is something that still is something that should be grasped more. I had an example from New York where there is a fantastic toolkit for active design for schools. And this is not new. I know this is also much more happening in Europe, but I just wanted to mention it, that a lot of schools are redesigned, and it doesn't cost a lot of money. It has a great impact on how children can play and be more healthy. Another thing that still is an issue, obviously, is of course the road safety and the safety of children going to schools. Often this is also connected with air pollution. For example, this is a school that we were working on in Manila in the Philippines, and at the left side it's a bit hidden by the scheme. There's the school entrance, but at the right side you see also in front of the school there's a gas station, and it just reopened. It just had they just gave the environmental permit for another 10 years. So this is still a very big issue, and I know also this is a big issue in Belgium, where there's a lot of advocacy through schools, through families happening. There's a lot of good advocacy documents around. So if you need good data, I think it's worth to look at documents that UNICEF has also been involved, like the Child Health Initiative that is really focusing on road safety and cleaner air. And there's also at the positive side from like advocacy, more like a technical book that just came out 2 weeks ago. It's a Designing Street for Kids, which emphasizes this idea of not building roads, but actually designing streets for people. It's very interesting. And then finally, what I am working on now more, and I think it's really useful also to bring into the discussion about how schools should be designed, is actually about food, and the food in the cities and schools, because it's a way of also learning how we have to completely change our food system for planetary health, but also for our own health. And just wanted to bring some data on front. So last year we have, every year UNICEF makes a State of the World Children's Report. Last year the theme was food and nutrition, and on the schemes you see, like, so there has been amazing effort, of course, to bring down stunting amongst children, because there's more food security for the smallest children. But you see also in the lower figure is that there's a very strong increase of childhood obesity and overweight. So it goes from, in 20 years, there's actually almost a doubling. And Belgium is actually exactly the same. Belgium is 20% of children are obese or overweight, and that's something that actually is very difficult to change when they're adults, and leads also mostly to diabetes. And you've also probably noticed in communication lately that there's a big correlation between the vulnerability of patients with diabetes and COVID-19. So that's a link that I see, and I think it's worth to bring to the floor today. Where we have studied in that report also how a food system works, because of course it's not just about it's not just about convincing people to buy healthier food. That's a bit like the old school approach to responsibilize all the individuals, but to really look at the food system. where you see actually that often environments, and particularly in urban environments, there's food swamps, places where you can have access to food, but actually there's no healthy food, and it's not affordable to buy healthy food. And so we have developed a policy brief, which is about making urban food environments fit for children. This is more generally broadly to cities, how they could foster this food environment. But of course, schools play a very important role in procurement, but also in building farming in the school, and to be sure that they also try to influence the environment around schools, and that they also have shops around the schools that have healthy food. A very good example, and I'm going to close because I'm over my time. Very good example is actually the city of Amsterdam. That is one of the only cities that I know that is now reducing child obesity and overweight, and it is also particularly because they work with schools. So this is a wicked problem. So you don't have one solution, and built environment is one of the solutions, and also working on schools is one of the solutions. So, for example, the city invests into an active city program that is much broader beyond education, but they also invest in working with schools, actually convincing schools that they have to respond to 8 types of activities or points of attention, and then they get a label, etc. And so they try to convince all the schools to also be part of that. And in the 8 activities, you see also that the built environment is very important. So as a closing, I wanted to share my thoughts on the topic of COVID-19 and how schools can play a role into making sure children are healthy and cities are healthier. Is that, first of all, the environmental context has shaped the conditions for COVID-19 to appear and also to have such a big impact. So it's important to think about the environment and not just to look at it from a viral aspect. Secondly, healthy cities, they shouldn't rely only on the healthcare system. Of course, in the COVID-19 response, it's very obvious that this is a crisis situation. So you rely a lot on the experts, the virologists, and etc. But to really think about healthy cities will something that has to happen with all of us. It's part of a kind of health in all policies. And one of the policies is urban design and city planning, and that is key to ensure positively and also preventively a healthy environment in which children can adopt healthy behaviors in and around schools. So not only during time and in the school, but also the time for going to school and also using the school maybe after school hours. And to finally also realize that schools are key social infrastructure, not only for education, but also for health and food. So I end with that. I'm very happy that the schools in Belgium can reopen after summer. I guess everybody's happy with that. Because, for example, and of course, it's also thanks to the as good as it gets approach of containing the virus. Because, for example, if you look at United States where I lived, unfortunately, there's not a good federal engagement, and so a lot of schools will not open, unfortunately, on the 1st of September. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jens, for this presentation. Jens, I have some questions for you because I found a reaction of the HoReCa sector. HoReCa stands for hotel and hotels and cafes and so on. They managed to have extension and have terraces outside their facilities, and they use these terraces, which are, I see them sometimes aggressively taking part of the public space in order to allow their customers to have a drink or have a meal in a public space that was not designed for that purpose. In the context of your presentation, which I found very interesting, especially that you're highlighting the importance of space, but not as an indoor, but here as an outdoor space, especially that we are complaining about the ventilation problems. And as you know, there is a lot of mechanical solutions proposed to increase the mechanical ventilation rate and so on. And everybody's asking, how can I better ventilate the space? and some others are saying let's have a CO2 meter on every teacher to check how much is the CO2 concentration indoors. I think one of the obvious solution is to go out if possible, or maximize or create a kind of invite the students or the pupils to go outside and make benefit for all the activities that you are mentioned, physical activities, planting, engaging with nature, and so on. Did you find this reaction of having extra terraces in relation to schools? Did you find any initiatives that you found maybe interesting in reaction to the COVID to extend the urban boundaries or extend the public space for schools? Do you have any example or any case like that? I don't know.
I think it's a good suggestion that you make, and I don't have any example. And I think it's also because schools have been at this moment, first of all, been struggling to find a way to reopen, to have teachers also having to deal with their kids and having, to also comply to some rules and guarantees. And then of course summer also is in Europe mostly also a summer of holidays. But you see that there have been other dynamics that are very interesting, I think, for schools to tap into, or also as cities to see, can there not be a synergy, for example, to the dynamics that have appeared around placemaking, where you see a lot of public spaces that suddenly are used in another way, where there's less space for cars and more space for the terraces and more space, why not for also schools to use? Because it also fits into a discourse that you see a lot of cities are developing to have more car low zones and low emission zones, and particularly around schools, because that's where the children are. So I think that's a huge opportunity for local governance to link this question about we need more space for schools, and maybe obviously the public space that appears maybe and that can have other functions than purely a car related function.
Yeah, interesting. Okay, maybe one last question, Mr. Arts, before we can move to the next presentation, and maybe we have another discussion in the Q&A. Do you remember when Mrs. Aller, she was talking that they changed in Denmark the schedule for breaks between classes. So it was not anymore this systematic common break for every one or all classes. Actually, they created kind of customized classes for the students, and this resulted that the teachers are more supervising them, and it gave a positive feedback. Maybe I'm looking to know more about that, but in this context, maybe I would like to ask you, do you think that if we do these customized or special break between classes for every group, this can require different kind of playgrounds, facilities for the kids in the schools? After the COVID, what do you think can be changing if we will not have this common playing thing? Is that going to change something? Especially, I'm very concerned with the games for the kids and how they can play in the space. Any thoughts about that?
Your questions are not so easy, I think they also raise good ideas. Again, I think what is still an issue is that the whole sector of education and health is still actually gathering good data. There's still research happening about what exactly is the risk of contamination. And so, for example, the discussion also about ball games, etc. So hopefully there's a lot of evidence that comes out of this crisis that also can be used to improve the design and to better optimally use courtyards, and also define what are types of games and tools that are safe or not safe.
Okay, so thank you very much, Jens, for this presentation, and thank you for accepting our invitation. Bear with us until we come to the Q&A. So we will move to the third presenter of today's webinar, and this is Deborah Elements, and she will present her work. I would like to present Deborah. She is an architect and urbanist in public architecture with master degrees in architecture. She worked as an architect for 8 years on public housing projects, and in 2014 she started working for the infrastructures of the Wallonie Bruxelles Federation as a manager of school buildings in the territory of Brussels region exclusively. In 2018, she worked also as an architect in the monitoring of the construction of school project subsidies for the municipalities of the Brussels region. With that said, I would like to leave Deborah Tillemans presenting her talk. Deborah, would you like me to share the presentation or you will take over?
I will take over.
Okay, I will stop sharing the screen.
Everybody can see my slide?
Yes, we can see.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Thank you, Shadi, and good afternoon, everyone. So I'm not speaking English every day, so I will try to speak slowly to make sure you will understand. Anyway, first of all, yes, Wallonie Bruxelles Education. Are school buildings resilient? What's WIBE? WIBE is organized the teaching of FWB, the French speaker area in Belgium, Wallonia and Brussels, in the same way as GEO, Gemeenschap Onderwijs, in Flanders. And WIBE became an autonomous public organization by special decree on February 7 last year. And it's a very, very young organization. And the new head of WIBE took office on April 20 of this year during the lockdown period, which was not easy. Well, in my presentation, I'm going to go through the WIBE school buildings COVID experience, I will say, and the questions we ask ourselves during and after the lockdown. Also the challenges we were crossing during and after the pandemic. Well, WIBE's territory extends from Arlon to Brussels, and the school building stock is quite old, and most of the buildings were built before 65. Less than 16% were built after 85, and a little bit more than half of the buildings are traditional construction, about 57%. And finally, more or less 43% of the school buildings are semi-prefab. So I will discuss about the following 5 points: strategies developed by WIBE during and after COVID. Not after, but we know the link between spaces and functions in building, financing found for COVID especially, the use of technology in architecture, and the future for WIBE school buildings. Solidarity that we need it, and we have to need it during the COVID. There was.
Did you change the slides?
Oh, sorry. I'm sorry. So I don't repeat my slide, but you can see it, I suppose. Yes, that's it. And financing technology and prospects for WIBE. So solidarity, yes, during the COVID, there was a big solidarity among all partners in the schools, with local people, teaching staff, WIBE, and FWB, which is the Minister of Education. I try to, okay. All right. WIBE's 3 administrative tools. So WIBE organize a COVID task force in harmony and efficient way to carry out teaching team function and every actor and technical action in the buildings with the top management and the concerned actor in the field, local people, in consultation with the government. There was a real dialogue with local and head management, top management. Creation of a COVID team with the head of the WIBE management and the internal service for Prevention and Protection at Work, SIPPT, mailing platform via WeBe, including COVID checklist, which gave an official and verified information in real time to avoid rumors. There was a FAQ is daily updated. There are logistical and psychological support for students and parents via the WeBe psychomedical social centers in each zone, and also specific support for headmasters and teachers in the field. Today, we are not longer in an unknown situation. We are in a predictable situation from the experience and achievements of the first wave, I would say. And WeBe's communication strategy, it's 4 colors that you know in Belgium. Green is usual situation, and yellow primary school return back to school as usual. Secondary school have distant learning on Wednesday or back to school as usual, said the Minister of Education this week. And orange is a social distancing for every student and pupils. Teaching is provided half-time in the classroom, half-time online, and no daycare service. For yellow and green, all the student pupils need to keep health precautions, barrier measures, and student wave flow organization in the classroom and in the school. Red, same as orange, and for secondary school is full online teaching. WeBe has strengthened e-learning teacher training and communication, and during the lockdown period, WeBe gave teachers the opportunity to use other free public platforms on Google or Facebook, in addition to existing official online platform e-learning. Some webinars for headmaster and teacher and Moodle type solution are still effective. A set of specific training lectures for teacher or teaching staff is to be held now and in the future. The COVID situation has pushed and moved WeBe into another dimension of learning, of course. Okay, that's correct. There are 2 consequences of the space organization according to Bubbles, which is 10 square meters for students and 4 square meters for teachers. First one, classrooms are too small, so we need to divide the number of children in 2 groups per day, or morning and afternoon. Second one, using other room as a classroom, daycare or lunchroom, playground, teacher's room, etc. Flexibility of areas or classroom allows a greater diversity of use and functions. So most of the traditional school buildings are quite easily adaptable, we see. It depends also of classroom side and the building itself, a school campus or a small school in the countryside. It depends of the typology. Schools have make markings on the floor for separate groups in the sanitary facilities and common area. Students were also separate in groups according to different floor levels. All unnecessary equipment was stored in unused spaces. And a space of 1.5 meters was made between all tables. Classrooms were cleaned twice a day in the morning and in the afternoon. And all these reactions questioned the school of tomorrow in terms of spatial organization and hygiene. We need fungible buildings, adaptable, flexible, and multifunctional spaces, of course, easy to exchange for other functions of the same type and value. Maybe a way to rethink school and teaching as a whole. For teaching staff, before the beginning of the school year, WeBe is planning in September WIBI is planning training lectures to prepare headmasters and teaching staff. This resilient model of solidarity of communication tool was initiated by the head of WIBI and teaching staff together. This tool was developed as a multidisciplinary task force, including teaching staff and zone coordinators and the central services of WIBI. Unfortunately, COVID brought out the social fracture, the digital social divide, which we knew about it, but we didn't have any figure or clear picture of it. Now we can say that less or more, 20% of the children are not connected at home, less or more, 30% are only poorly connected. This means that about 50% of children are not in minimum conditions for getting online teaching. This observation is linked to the social divide and clearly appeared in some areas of the French-speaker Belgium community, especially in cities and areas with fragile social economic indices. FWB, so the Minister of Education, and WIBI collected more or less 10,000 computers from private companies and companies specialized in recycling computers for children in financial difficulties. Now we are still looking for computers anyway.
Deborah, I'm sorry.
Sorry, choice.
Can you ask you to accelerate a bit the pace, because
okay. I do it. So what were our choices, or what choices did we have? So it's nearly finished. The government released 40 million euros for the COVID health situation, 10 million for school buildings, 2 million for WIBI, and especially in sanitary facilities with an emergency procedure. So a specific procedure. So its amount represents 7% of the annual budget for the usual maintenance. And the amount of sanitary facilities according to the criteria of number of girls and boys, rule of good practice and not a legal one, which increases flexibility. And this program is starting and will be implemented in school in September. Some points about technology. So we shut down the ventilation and of the recirculated air system, and we opened the windows quite easy, but an exception to that was possible only for the system that could switch to 100% pure air. And some of this system had to be adjusted by professionals, not by the teacher, sorry. So some specified and technical interventions are not very resilient. If the building is passive, the occupant cannot open the window. If the system is 100 recycled, it cannot occupy the building. And the other hand, if the system is mixed interior exterior, the occupation is possible. Passive school is low resilience building at the moment. And I will finish. Back to school. Last one. Yes, to be sure that every child and teacher grows up in healthy environment. That's
the slide is moving with you, because we are on the technology slide.
Oh yes, I've got the one. No. Back to school? No. Oh, so
no, we don't see the last one.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Still at technology. Now we see it.
All right. It makes time. Okay. The last one. It's the last one. So provide healthy and high quality school buildings for every children and teachers, respond in this complex health context to the needs of the user, and don't forget the increase of population growth. How to incorporate digital technology in teaching and autonomy, how to rethink schedules and lectures organization, what is the school of tomorrow for the future, and achieve harmonization between quality and security measures, education and school buildings. And at the same time, the Minister for the Budget and School Buildings is setting up the School Buildings Project, which has the ambition or rethink school building for 21st century school and a new strategy for WIBI school buildings. And I thank for your attention. Sorry, I was
Thank you very much, Deborah, for this presentation. Well, I will take over the screen sharing. Just a second. So I would like to go back to Mrs. Tillemans, and I have some questions for you.
Yes.
I think the presentation is very interesting to give some insights on what's happening in the Wallonie Bruxelles region. Yeah. You mentioned, you accentuated a lot in your discussion the acts of solidarity and inequalities. Maybe this was not directly, explicitly, but what was the situations? Were there difficult situations that some schools students were having access and some are not? What was the situation in this regard? Because you mentioned in your final slide that it was very important to assure that there will be access to all in an equal way. So I'm very curious about that. Can you elaborate? Were there really specific cases where it was difficult to achieve that goal?
That we but I'm not in the education department, but we see that a lot of students wasn't connected because the teacher or the teacher staff say, okay, we got a lot of students lost, and so that we knew that it was a problem with connecting, but in this we didn't see the amount of it. So we decided to explore and analyze this situation. First of all, we need computers, and there are some arrived 10,000 for students, but we didn't really analyze these numbers of students lost. Okay. So we have to do it precisely.
Yeah. And there is another question you mentioned before the end that about the technical part, that passive schools were less resilient. What do you mean by passive schools and why they were less resilient?
No, it was in brackets. When when okay, I take my the problem is more the ventilation. If the building is totally locked, it's a problem because we cannot open the window, and if it's the air system is totally recycled, it's a problem too. So we need to think about mixed solution and to be really pay attention, because the most problem in a school building is not to have cold, but to have too hot, because we need refreshing air all the time, because there are 30 students in the classroom, and the most difficult is the CO2, and that's very important. So it's because I say passive, because passive is like a thermos or thermo, and for passive school is another way of housing, passive housing. That's I would say, because we need probably a passive system for school.
Yeah, yeah.
That's all.
Thank you very much for that. I understand exactly what you mean, and I found your presentation very valuable because you gave insights on what happened. And I find also the checklist of COVID that you mentioned very interesting, and the creation of the Wallonie Bruxelles education as an organism is very interesting. That it was going in parallel with this pandemic, and even though it's late, but I would say it's better than nothing because this can, for the future, improve the robustness of the public sector to respond and coordinate and engage in order to have an after COVID actually measures. Thank you very much, Deborah Tillemans.
Thank you too.
I'll
Bye.
move to the final last speaker, and we will maybe come back to you in the Q&A sessions. Please stay connected. Well, so I would like to move now to the final presenter of today, Mr. Juan Torres. Allow me to present him. Juan Torres is a certified urban planner, professor at the School of Urban Planning and Landscape Architecture, and Vice Dean of Research and Partnerships at the Faculty of Environmental Design, University of Montreal. He holds degrees in architecture, urban planning, and environmental design, and his research and teaching focus on urban design, especially with regard to child-friendly environments and the participation of children and youth in the city design. With that said, I would look for his presentation to share it. Juan, can you hear me?
Yes, thank you very much, Shadi.
Don't hesitate to tell me next in order to move on.
Okay, thank you very much. And I hope everybody can hear what I'm saying right now. I think that the chat issue is now solved, so perhaps we are going to have more interaction later. Yes. And first, good afternoon. I say good morning if you are like me in America. Greetings from Montreal. It's a pleasure to be with you today, and not only a pleasure, I'm really grateful for giving me this opportunity to reflect about an issue that affects me, well, in many ways affects me as a parent of children who attend school here in the province of Quebec. It affects me as a professor at the University of Montreal, where we have also to adapt all our strategies for shift towards online teaching activities, but also affects me as a urban planner, and that's perhaps the perspective I would like to adopt in the next minutes for sharing with you some ideas that are actually, I hope, complementary to those of my former colleagues on this table, and more particularly with those of James Art's, this perspective of the relationship between school and urban planning. I think that James put the table very well, so I'm now going to be able to focus in some particular issues. So please, if you can start the first slide. I wanted to, to recommend you a movie on the way to school. There is also a series of a series. I hope it's available on the country you are right now, and it's very interesting because it shows all these different ways that the path from home to school and then back to home is experienced by different children around the world. So I wanted to start by recalling this huge diversity of the experience of school and around the world by different children. But also I wanted to highlight three common things that we can acknowledge about schools around the world. The first one is that school is a resource for communities. It's an important resource which brings opportunities for of course, for development for children, but also for their families, for the society, for the community as a whole. Second common thread is that, of course, schools also affect the daily organization, the routines of families, schedules, calendars. Well, name them. There are a lot of ways in which school is actually affecting our daily lives as families around the world. And the third common trait, please, if you can switch to the next slide. Well, the third common thing about schools around the world right now is the COVID shock that we are living. That from UNICEF shows that almost all children, all students around the world are affected by what's happening right now, especially with the temporary closure of schools. Some call it a tragedy because, of course, it's affecting in a very severe way those who need the most of this community resources, of this resource, which is the school. We are afraid that almost 10 million children will never return to school following the COVID-19 lockdown. So it's a very important shock around the world that is actually a threat for education and for the development of our communities around the planet. Now, how is it shocking? Please, if you can continue to the next slide. It's shocking because it's making it difficult, of course, to attend. It's making our homes a new place for new activities. I'm sure you have been seeing how our kitchens become now classrooms, and how all the space, the residential space in our homes has suffering huge pressure, because it's becoming the place where we work for us as adults, but also for children. And there is a lot of pressure and a lot of issues that my colleagues earlier mentioned in Denmark or in around the world. But also there is another important impact that connects with urban planning, which is the loss of the opportunity to walk daily from home to school. This is an important loss because these trips represent the majority of the daily mobility of children around the world. Here, for instance, in Montreal, data from the origin destination surveys show that 80 to 90% of the daily trips of children are related with this trip from home to school. So this is a loss of an opportunity for active transportation, for physical activity, as was mentioned before, but also a loss of an opportunity for engaging with the neighborhood, for exploring, for occupying public space as a children. So next slide, please. Well, this was especially true, this loss of opportunities of occupying public space, since during the highest of the wave of the lockdown, we also saw, I don't know if in your city it was the same thing, but we also saw many parks and play areas around the city in different neighborhoods closed for sanitary reasons. So for children, it's been really the loss of important opportunities to occupy, to be in the city, to be in their community, in their neighborhood. Well, the positive effects, however, of this lockdown was a drastic diminishing in the number of cars in the streets. Perhaps you saw it as well in your city around the world. So it also opened the door for exploring or for feeling differently about being in the street as a children or as a parent with children. Also, we saw in cases where schoolyards were accessible to the neighborhood, how they became also a refuge. They became one of those places where now children were able to go to play, to be with their friends, with neighbors. So this has shown us how the city and its spaces have now been playing new roles and getting new importance in the daily experience of the city by children. Next slide, please. Now, we are now preparing in different cities, in different countries around the world to come back to school. We're here in Quebec. We are planning a return to school with important measures of protection for children, but it's going to be a return to school in presence. Children are going to be there, and I'm sure the strategy that has been adopted by our government has many traits in common with those of other provinces and other countries around the world. So, it's a strategy that has common threads, but also that has some differences. I have friends in the United States, for instance, who are not coming back to school in presence. They're going to continue with school at home, and same thing in Mexico, where part of my family is still living. So it's been a very different strategy, and these strategies are territory linked. They are related with the local situation, of course, with the local strategies and with the local resources we have for imagining and planning this return to school. But something that perhaps is less observed when we think about the strategies is again, the mobility, this trip between home and school. And of course, all these strategies to coming back to school are putting a lot of pressure on these public transit services or school transit services. Next slide, please. Just to mention an example, in our cities, we are now looking for more space between people. We are, in the context of COVID as well, expecting children to be respecting a certain distance between them, included in the buses, including in the cars or in the different vehicles that enable the access to school for children who live at a certain distance from the schools. So it's putting a lot of pressure on this transportation service, and I think it's important to highlight how the success on the management of transport, of transit, of public transit, is an important factor. It will be an important factor of the success on our strategies of coming back to school and managing the school. Next slide, please, because I also wanted to highlight how schools and territories are also in a very deep relationship, especially when we imagine schools as a proximity service, a proximity equipment. And well, if schools are changing their capacity because the space is limited, and because we are now expecting more space between children, between users, well, there is a risk of affecting the balance between the service area of schools before COVID, the capacity of the schools. So we are also facing the risk of affecting this balance that was already quite fragile and not necessarily resilient, unfortunately, because our schools, I don't know, in your cities, in your countries, but here in Quebec, for instance, were already crowded before the COVID. So now all this pressure for space is highlighting the need for place and the need for schools that are more flexible, as was mentioned also before by Deborah. And now, for those who walk to school, there is also an important issue, because in the public space, we are also expecting more distance between pedestrians. So of course, sidewalks won't grow and won't be larger in September. So how to manage this need for more pedestrian-friendly public space, especially around the schools, that is the places where many pedestrians get together and concentrate, and also many users of motorized vehicles. Well, one of the strategies that seems to be promising is the school streets approach. So I'm putting here these guidelines from the 880 Cities organization. And well, it also answers one of the Shadi's questions to James, and when he was referring to cafes and restaurants occupying public space, where this is a way for schools to occupy more public space. And well, it's an occupation that is concentrated in time. That is, the measure consists in closing the streets around the schools during the peak hours in the morning and in the afternoon, when more children and their families are gathering in the vicinity of the schools. So next slide, please. I am going to finish with two slides, which are not really answers or clever ideas, but more questions that we can ask ourselves, because we have seen in our cities also a lot of temporary measures by shops, by commerce for commerce activities, for schools. We will see them. So what's going to happen with these temporary devices? Are we being able to evaluate their impact, their benefits, and also to have arguments to claim for the need for keeping them after the COVID crisis? What will happen with our relationship to workplaces? This is also important because residential choices are affected by many factors, but two important ones are the locations of work and the locations of school. So with this new relationship to work, with all the rise of telework activities, well, what's going to be now the new pattern? What's going to be the new equation for choosing residential areas for residential mobility? This is an important issue because it could also affect the weight of school in this equation. And so how residential areas, how urban areas are around the cities are going to live more or less pressure after COVID with these new factors, and how this is going to translate in new pressure, more or less, on the actual strategy that we have in our schools for covering the existing areas. And well, what's going to be the impact on the balance, on this equilibrium that has to be dynamic between schools and their capacity to serve the children in the neighborhood? So the last one, please, is, well, just a word to highlight three things: the need, the importance of schools' adaptability, the importance also of coordination between school or education authorities and urban municipal authorities. This coordination takes different shapes depending on the jurisdiction we are. Here in Quebec, we have been observing of course, the problems, the issues of an existing structure, but also the importance for, and we have seen the stakeholders engaging in new ways of interacting and collaborate and coordinate. And I think this is within the COVID context more important than ever. And the last one, well, the importance of children and youth inclusion in these processes, because we are in the middle of we said a very important situation. We're in the middle of a crisis and we need rapid answers, but we have to keep in mind that children and youth are also stakeholders and they have their word to say, and perhaps participating in all this process could be very useful in their development process, at least on their development as citizens. So the claim for children and youth participation in the process of understanding what's happening with our schools in the COVID and the eventual post-COVID context, I think it's an important also issue that I haven't heard in the past weeks and months. So that's it. A last slide just to say thank you. Merci, gracias, for those who are from Chile or other countries where we speak Spanish. So that's it.
Thank you very much, Juan Torres, for the presentation. We will proceed with our Q&A session today. We had the fourth speaker today was Juan Torres. I think I would like to invite the audience to send emails to Geoffrey from Mosaica if they fail to raise hand or use the chat box. For those who can use it, we would like to get your feedback on it. Juan, until that happens, I would like just to interact with you on your very interesting presentation. I found it very enlightening, especially when you talked about the ways to reach the schools and when you provided information on the absenteeism. Actually, the problem seems on a global scale that the global south has a different reality than normalized or standardized countries where there is a stronger presence. But the presentation of Deborah highlighted these inequalities. So in a short question, did you have in Canada any experiences with losing students coming back in this sense, or parents deciding to not send their kids to school?
Well, it's still too early to evaluate the size of the problem of children and youth not coming back for continuing their education. I'm sure we are going to be able to measure it later, perhaps during the next months. Now, what we can see, at least here in the province of Quebec, because education is a provincial attribution and responsibility, so it changes from province to province. Here in Quebec, what we have seen is also how many parents are worried and are actually asking the government to prepare a parallel answer. I mean, yes, continue with the plan of reopening the schools and receiving, hosting the children, but also offering to parents who decide not to expose their children to these activities in group with other children who are in contact with other people. So many parents are also asking the government to prepare a parallel answer with the online learning activities and so on. So this is the last week what we have seen and heard in the news, and this is the pressure that the government has. And of course, I can understand also how within a limited amount of resources, it's quite difficult to advance in both kind of answers and both kind of educational approaches. But I think it's important to attend the claims of these parents, and the question is, how can we answer with the limited resources we have? We need not only more economic resources, but of course we need teachers, experts, people who are able to prepare and to teach in different approaches. And that's another issue that we had even before COVID, the lack of teacher and the lack of human resources for satisfying the needs in terms of education.
Yeah. Thank you, Juan. Geoffrey, do you have any access to questions or a way to find questions?
We have a question from Ms. Blade de Souza. Please unmute and ask your question.
Hi, I am just curious to compare the different frameworks of how countries are dealing with this. And I have a question to Mrs. Aller, because I thought the Danish approach was very interesting and seemed very based on participation. First of all, could you please remind us on the number of COVID cases in Denmark, as well as the number of fatalities, because it seems that this is a very important factor in opening, in deciding of opening schools, and also in deciding, in parents deciding to send kids back and so on. And then what were the measures that were taken for students shielding or parents shielding for health reasons? Because that is another discussion that is very unclear in many countries. So were these people allowed to receive online learning? Was a mixed system put in place? Were parents fined for not sending children to school? How were children's anxieties listened to it? Because as Juan very well mentioned, children are also stakeholders. So how are their anxieties factored in? Because in the UK, we are seeing a lot of children very anxious to go back because they are scared. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Clarice. Mrs. Aller, are you there? Hello?
Yes, I should be here.
Could you catch up the three questions? One was related to the number of COVID cases.
Yes, and unfortunately, I'm not. I can't give you the exact cases, but what I can tell you is that we've been very, very lucky here, and please don't ever refer these figures. But I think the number of casualties in Denmark are around 600.
Okay.
But I mean, testing has been huge. So we've got over 1 million tests, and we have a population of somewhere around 5. So, but the number of casualties, I'm sorry, I only know that it's not figures that we usually work with, to be honest. In the Ministry of Children and Education, that's something that's kept with the health authorities. And then I'm not quite sure I got the other question, but
was on distant learning or providing alternative for distance learning.
Well, if the ministry has provided alternatives, well, no.
Yeah, I just asked because you said that there were lots of custom-based solutions, and I wondered if there was any custom-based solutions for parents or children shielding or anxious about not going back so that they would be contaminated with COVID or something like that. Because
yes.
Like Juan mentioned, there is like in Canada, some parents are pushing for it for a mixed system. And that again ticks the box of not one size fits all. And I was wondering if a system like that was in place in Denmark or is still in place. So.
Yeah. Well, sorry, now I got you. I'm so sorry. Yes, well, and the answer exactly depends on which phase we're talking about. Because in the first reopening phase, if you were not comfortable sending your children to school, it was absolutely okay to keep them at home, and online distance teaching would be in place. So that was the choice of the individual family, whether the children would go or not. And in phase 1, some parents did choose to keep their children home, but fairly early they decided to send their kids anyway, because rumor had it, amongst the parents that it was safe, the children were happy going back. Today, you have to go to school. So right now in the phase 4, children must go to school.
Clarice, another final question, or that's it?
No, that's it. I was just curious because to me, the number is very important. When you have 600 fatalities compared to 45,000 or more, it's a very different story because the level of contamination in the community is very different. Or 170,000 like in the US, So I'm just looking at what were the different approaches of the different countries in comparison to the overall number of fatalities, because that obviously should play a very big role.
Yes,
on decision making. So
yeah,
that was it. Thank you.
The high or low community spread of the pandemic.
Yeah.
Important. Thank you very much. Geoffrey, another question?
Yeah, I have received a comment from Ms. Valeria Nosse.
Can you please share your question?
Or I can summarize it if you're...
Okay.
Well, basically, it's the idea that we were already struggling with the health.
Directed to somebody particularly?
Excuse me?
Is it directed to a speaker?
No, it's more a comment globally on the webinar. So she's thanking us for the webinar and stressing that health children in school is something we struggled with already before COVID-19. And she emphasizes that we need to enhance communication and partnership with various expertises, which is sociology, health, school health, urban architecture, and so on. And we need canals to communicate more on as I understand, a transdisciplinary approach of the health of children in schools, which is a hot topic even without COVID-19.
I assume this is a comment.
Yeah, this is a...
Yes, it's a comment. And sorry, my English is enough to write, but not enough to speak. So thank you to have summarized what I've written.
I fully agree with you. The approach is complex for this pandemic, and it's not enough to only focus on the health aspect. We have a space, we have users, we have families, and there's a certain complexity. And I find it very interesting that the relation between outdoor, indoor was discussed in this seminar, how the different occupant behavior changed and the social distancing and the use of breaks was different in different places, and definitely the technical aspect related with cleaning, facilities, infrastructure, natural ventilated spaces, and so on. Okay, Geoffrey, another comment?
Yeah, from Mariel and Radia Cisternas, who says that obviously COVID-19 will have an impact on how we design and refurbish schools. And she's asking for a comment, but I know, Muriel, who in particular you're waiting a comment for, and in particular about the question of ventilation and passive buildings.
So what's the question and to whom is it directed? I would like to ask the audience to be more specific, to direct the question to someone and specify the question.
Muriel, are you there?
Yes, the question is
it directed to whom?
Directed to if someone is interested in commenting about if the design of school buildings is going to change to COVID. You commented before about problems with ventilation in passive houses. Maybe that's something that should change. But if you have some comments about it.
I would ask maybe Juan, would you like to answer this question, because you talked about the services relation between the services and the classrooms in school buildings. Do you think, based on this question, that the design of schools will change in the future?
Well, I think design of schools is changing anyway because our pedagogic approaches are also changing. Well, at least I think school design should change because as societies, as communities, and we are also evolving, and our pedagogic approaches are changing. So now the thing is how the changes are going to reflect the COVID situation and the needs for more distancing, or as mentioned by Deborah, for more resiliency. That's a very good question. I don't know how is it going to change. I hope so. But one thing that we have also to take in account is that these changes are quite slow. I mean, here in Quebec, for instance, some authors have calculated the time between the beginning of the idea of a new school, the design, and the construction. It actually takes several years. It can go up to 6 years. So I don't know in 2026 what's going to be our issues then, but I'm sure what is a duty for professionals in the areas of design, architectural design, interior design, urban design, what is a duty is to take in account what is happening and to open the eyes to this fragility of our current systems and the need for, by design, helping our societies to cope with this new reality and with the trends for this kind of problems and crises.
Thank you, Juan. Deborah or Jens, would you like to comment on this question?
Yes, I would like. Thank you. Yeah, I think it should change, of course, but we cannot change every buildings, every house, every school building. So what we need to do is think about flexibility. I speak about fungible, because flexibility of function. A classroom could be a lot of things. A classroom could be a playground, a computer class, a discussion class. So we need space and we need flexibility. So that's maybe the future. And of course, playground, outdoor and indoor, which is also a real objective, because we need now we need to think about COVID, we need to think about climate, we need to think about demography or population, growing population, which is a lot of things to think about it. And they are quite important. So, I mean, design building will be very, very, I mean, about function, very flexible places, I think. Thank you.
Thank you, Deborah. Maybe, Geoffrey, do we have other questions?
Elisabeth raised her hand, so maybe she wants to comment.
Yes, go on.
Yes, thank you. What an interesting question. Because one thing that we have experienced is that both teachers and students have had, very, very positive experiences with the outdoor classroom. And just to follow up on what you said, Deborah, I just wrote it down. A classroom can be many things, and that's exactly what they've realized. And we find that it's very, very possible that the outdoor space as a classroom has come to be way more, because the pedagogical experiences have been so positive when you move teaching outside, both when it comes to how do you benefit as a student and as a class, but also the relationship competences that are built outdoors. And then just to follow up on the previous question, I managed to just find the information. We have unfortunately had 621 casualties. 1.4 million persons have been tested and 16,000 contaminated. Thank you.
Thank you very much. For the question of Muriel and the answer of Juan, Deborah, and Elisabeth. Geoffrey, other reactions or questions?
Not on my side.
Not on your side.
Okay. Ms. Lady Souza.
Sorry, I have a final question, and I think it's for Mrs. Aller and also for Ms. Tillman, which is related to the role of distribution of IT distributivity in the community, because it seems that from the presentation that Deborah raised, the COVID-19 brought to surface the socio-economical technological divide, and not only in Belgium but in many, many countries. Potentially in Belgium you might have computed it better and you perhaps have numbers, but yeah, I'm sure in other countries it also was an issue, and perhaps not all of them computed that. So how is this factored in for the future education and for the future of education, and what policies were put in place to improve the distribution of IT resources? Because that is not simply going there and talking about gathering computers and sending to people. You also have to have proper internet connection. You also have to have like a series of other things in place. So were any top-down or local level policies pushed forward to reduce this gap, or they were only at the hands of charities? What kind of level was, from the government, from policies were put in place to mitigate these? Because this seems to be, especially in the UK, it's been talked about many, many times, but it seems that there is no solution to it, or there is nobody steps in and takes responsibility for that. So I was wondering what kind of and when you talk to schools, many of them will say we don't want to provide face-to-face or video because we know a lot of students cannot get access to it. So it becomes like a catch-22 situation. And I wonder what is the example from Denmark and Belgium in this respect?
Yes, I can respond now. All right. I'm not from the education department, but we of course we learn of COVID because we did see this fracture, and we didn't have numbers or precise numbers of it, and less or more I've said. This means that about 50% of children are not in minimum condition for getting online teaching. And we now collected 10,000 computers from the companies. But we know that that's a real problem, because we just passed through another way of teaching with COVID, and they are thinking of make a co-working place for students and pupils in each zone, which Wallonie Brussels is divided in 10 zones from Arlon to Brussels. And they think of, yes, to have co-working with social distancing. And that's mean we need a more, it's quite early. So we need to know. And we have in each zone these psychomedical center, which are direct with teacher and parents and students, Centre PMS, and that's the way how to speak and how to know how many pupils, how many students are in the difficulty or they don't have any computers. So that's a real problem. We work on it now, and they think of co-working and computer distribution.
Thank you, Deborah. Maybe Elisabeth?
Yep. Well, we have maybe a very different scenario here because, first of all, the Danish constitution states that basic education, primary, secondary, and tertiary must be free. And that means that you can't place, costs on parents or even young people. And that means that those students who for some reason do not have access to IT equipment, devices, they must be given it by the school, the municipality, whoever is the school owner, except at the secondary and tertiary, that's not given by the school. So you need your own computer. But primary and lower secondary, if you do not have IT devices yourself, then it must be given by the school owners.
Thank you very much. I would like to close the meeting with some concluding remarks. Well, the COVID definitely is a shock. It's a disruption that shows that the resilience of schools is not like what we expect. The battle is on different fields, from technical to behavioral to spatial, and definitely financial also comes in the picture. It's not only a medical health care, but it's a problem that shows the fragility of our ecosystem, our educational ecosystem, how we build our cities, how we build our schools. And definitely the speakers were very complimentary today. I would like to thank them, because we had architects, urban planners, and representative of the state regarding education policy. And in this context, I think our seminar succeeded to answer a lot of questions. I would like to apologize for the issues related to starting late or with interaction. But finally, if you want to have a question, you still can send it to Geoffrey van Moezeke. Otherwise, for the comment on what will come after COVID, for sure, this seminar is not talking about after COVID enough, but it's giving some leads. Where can we go? As I told you before, Mrs. Aller was promising that they will have a learned lessons report published by the end of the year. I heard also from Deborah that something will come out soon, a report. So we are looking forward to learn from the after COVID in order to answer the question that was how to design future schools and how to manage the existing ones. The adaptability was a key word today, flexibility, local governance, communication, inclusion, solidarity. These are all keywords that I learned from the speakers today. With that said, I would like to thank Elisabeth Aller, Jens Arts, Deborah Tillemans, and Juan Torres for his presentation, and the audience. Thank you very much.